Welcome to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series. Today, we're very honored to have audio description narrator Valerie Hunter. Thanks for joining us, Valerie.
Hi, thanks. It's an honor to be on here.
Let's see where we go. Let's start off with, what do you love about audio description?
It's one of those things where it's like, I've been doing it for so long now in so many different aspects. It's like, what do you like about riding a bike? Or what do you like about driving or something? I like the inclusivity of it. I like the fact that I'm helping make these connections between creative people and more of their audience than they would have otherwise. I am very respectful of being a conduit to that and to also help the audience, particularly when it's mixed. When I was first learning how to do this, when I was first learning what audio description described video was, part of how I learned was in the context of a family of some people who have vision impairments and some who don't, quote unquote, watching a TV show or a film at the same time. Before audio description, the sighted person would usually have the job we have now of being the person who reacts and is going, oh, that person's doing that and this person's doing this and blah, blah, blah. And we've taken over for them in the best sense. If we're doing our job right, we're the best version of that. So that means that the sighted person has less to do. And the intention that I learned is for the sighted person and the non-sighted person to hopefully experience the visual media as synchronous as possible. That's at least the goal for me. So that means sharing the emotions that an audience has when they're reacting to the visual media and being able to help facilitate sharing that experience, sharing that emotion. That's a big deal. That keeps you humble real quick and gives you a sense of what your purpose is doing this work. I really appreciate it and very grateful to have the opportunity to fulfill that role.
Let's explore a little more about that intention that you bring, the emotions that you bring to your narration. It sounds like you're really filled with care in how you bring that to the audience. Can you talk a little more specifically about that intention?
I think it connects with the eternal consideration that audio describers eventually have at some point as to riding that balance between being part of the visual media and being part of the audience. My mentor in these things at Audiovision Canada, way back in the day, was a fellow named Mark Rosen, and he said, you're the best audience that this visual media has. That is your role. So you are being a conduit. And so taking it at a bunch of different angles that I've taken over my audio description career, although I started as a voice person, I came from radio a zillion, billion years ago. But I came into audio description first as a producer. I was doing broadcast reading at NBRS Voice Print in Canada, so it was a reading service. And I was looking for work because I was transitioning out of radio and discovered I was going to try for a copy editor job, and it was already taken. But the boss said, weren't you in radio? I was like, no, radio. And well, there's this thing we do down the hall, and which I'd never been down the hall. And so I went down there, and so I went into it as a producer. So I went from production to riding shotgun on direction to being in the chair for direction to eventually actually being in the booth and then producing everything afterward, and then production manager, and then writing. And so all of these different angles. And so I think I have a perspective that all of those things have in common, which is that aspect of serving the audience and serving the creators. That's kind of the macro of the eternal, if someone's just coming at audio description as a voiceover artist initially, the acting idea of how much you give to something, whether you're acting it or whether you're reacting it. So this idea of being a conduit between the audience and the creator is the macro of that idea. It's very easy, though, to forget the audience because you're in the studio, you're in front of the little blocks of audio, you're moving around, you're all up in your own thing, being a studio rat, and it's easy to forget the audience because they're over there, and sometimes you don't hear from them at all. I've been fortunate that there has been some reaction. Here's a direction to take this in for a second. One very fortunate situation I was in was Audiovision Canada, my company at the time. We were the first company to do an audio described film that was in open description in a theater, in a cinema. And it was a special thing that we did with Alliance Atlantis at the time. And I voiced it. That wasn't the original intention. Originally it was going to be somebody else, and she couldn't make it, and it ended up being me, and I had a cold, and I'm like, so you felt the weight of that. And anyway, so we have the whole thing where we're syncing everything up together all day between the audio track and the projection and blah, blah, blah. This, I don't know how digital stuff works. and then eventually there we are with an audience, mostly of people with vision impairments, many of whom had never been in a cinema before. Holy. And there's my voice doing this thing for this movie. And of course, afterwards, everybody chats. And so you get I've never been to a cinema before, and I've usually had to bring my mom, or I've usually had to do this, that, the other thing. And woof, that weight that you remember that through the rest of your career, something like that. And so while I do get feedback in bits and pieces, it's hard to forget that. Got to that point.
And it sounds like that weight, that anchor that experience gave you is that, I love your use of the word conduit, that
it just popped up. I hadn't even thought of it before until I started talking about this, but yeah.
And what a connection that macro experience that you've had beyond just a narrator, but what'd you say, studio rat?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've always been since high school. Actually, it's funny. I was just talking yesterday with a friend of mine who his work, he's used to performing for an audience. He's not an actor, he's a sports person. And he had to go back and he's one of those sports people doing stuff without an audience anymore, without a crowd. They're watching online. And he's like, it's soul destroying is the term he used. And I'm like, to not have that energy there and stuff. And I'm like, wow, literally all my life, I have been used to, my life has been performing and working and communicating without the audience there. And that's been my strength. In fact, there have been the odd instance when I have done live description with an audience around. It's not my forte. So it's a mindset. And so that's a studio rat mindset. It's like you and this is true for recorded music, and everybody knows it's the engineers voiceover people meet all the time, or used to, now talk on Zoom, are studio rats, and it's just you in the studio, you and your voice in the studio, and nothing else seems to exist. And in fact, that helps me be able to work it because that's my mindset. But somewhere in the back there, in the back of my mind, I do know that there's an audience later. I can deal with it, the fact that it's separated a little bit, and I can handle that. I can handle that in terms of my performance, thinking of that in the abstract. But I don't forget that there are times when I've been able to know what they're thinking and feeling, not in the abstract, and that's somewhere in the back there. When you've done this as long as I have, I don't think of this constantly. I don't go into the studio and go, all these people are waiting to listen to me. Thank God. It's a thing later. I've been able to compartmentalize. But talking about what my intentions are and what the result of it is that comes through in my work, hopefully, I realize yeah, that's a major issue that has been part of my work through the whole thing.
Can you go back to your radio experience
Mm.
and compare that to the audio description? Are there similarities or are there differences?
There's a strong similarity for me in that I usually did my best stuff on radio. I mean, I did on-air stuff. I look back wondering how I ever did that, but most of my work was in production, was doing ads and stuff from the very beginning. I was always better at reading a script than doing ad libs. My one strength that I have over everything ever, the thing I'm the most confident at that I've done since I was 3 years old, is being able to read aloud. Did it with my grandma learning to read, did it through school, did the whole thing, And so that's the one thing I know I can do. So oftentimes when I was on air and I would have trouble or I felt weird or whatever, I had a scratch pad that I would write on and then read what I was writing and be able to sound like I was talking. That's always been my strength. So there's commonality right there. In audio description, there are other things to consider because I'm not exactly talking as myself. So there are instances where you will be conversational, but also there are way more instances where you're not exactly conversational. It's this other kind of nether world that a lot of describers coming from various places, be it from acting to broadcasting, whatever, that they have to figure out a balance. And when I was a director, trying to translate that balance to people to figure it out, like sometimes with broadcasters, announcers, more accurately, someone who comes in who has an awesome voice that you can just mix the heck out of and you'll hear them, they would still be announcing. And sometimes I'd have to say, okay, now I need you to try it again and talk like a normal person. And same thing for actors who are trying to be more actory about it at the beginning. Everybody learns this over time if you're becoming an audio narrator. It's still sounding natural when you're reading words on a page. And I have always taken that for granted, me being able to do that. So you bringing up that question, of course, connects with the whole idea of the disjointed audience, the audience in the abstract. So that's obviously the other thing. But yeah, the other thing is to be pretentious about it, making a script come to life, but also while still remembering the context of the work you're serving. So again, still keeping a bunch of balls in the air.
Sure. Juggling while riding the bicycle, while bringing the script to life. There's a lot of analogies that are all kind of coming together.
Yeah, I know.
I love it. It's great. Your explanation of talking like a normal person is something that hasn't been shared before in any interviews. Can you talk a little specifically about diving into what that means to you? Because obviously these are trained professionals who are announcing or trained, but there's something that you're looking for within this work. It sounds essential to you that talking like a normal person, well, it sounds so obvious, but why isn't that necessarily happening? I don't want to judge the announcers. I want to find out what you're seeking to bring.
By the same token, I was seldom the most polite nor diplomatic voice director. I apologize to all voice people that I worked with. I've gotten it back over the course of my career as well. So karma has worked its way. Okay, talking like a normal person. It's like I don't have any acting training. I have acting experience, done plays, done voice acting, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a very strong character person, nor am I a very strong accent person. So when I direct, I can only kind of take the stance of a member of the audience. So back to remembering the audience again. When a read sounds somehow affected, it's like, and it's very understandable because it's part of negotiating that balance we've been talking about, being the actor and being the reactor, being part of the piece and being the audience, about being the conduit. And so when I say talking like a normal person, it means the polite way of saying that is being more conversational. But it's like, talk like yourself talk like yourself as I'm talking to you now. Talk like you normally talk. And then once a person does that, and we see what that is, it could end up being too unaffected, too bland, too monotone, whatever. But at least get that base. And then you can add, first off, you can add, this is a thing that is tricky to, well, no, it's not that tricky to explain to voice actors. It's tricky to explain for more general actors, I think, is the emphasis of words in audio description to place elements in the geography of a person's mind if they can't see. Tiny bit more emphasis on certain words that are placing new elements in what you're describing. A new place, a new hair color that's going to distinguish a character from another person, whatever, that sort of thing. Those little elements have to be there in order for people to, well, I don't know if they have to be there. I think there's probably debate about that. I think they have to be there. So there's affect there, and also whether you definitely go down at the end of a sentence or not, depending on whether you're at the end of a scene. Well, it's not actually going up, but it's not going down. Whether you're at the end of a scene or to suggest that you're anticipating the next thing without actually anticipating it. So these are all affects, but those, if I'm starting from scratch with a voice person, that's what gets built up on top. And then, of course, there's the whole other thing about speed. Is your delivery consistent with the speed of the scene? Whether it's the amount of space you have or the speed of the actions that you're describing. I like those being relatively consistent so long as they can still be understood. Some people would say, I'd even dismiss the part about them being understood sometimes, but I should. But so all of these elements to me get kind of put on top of each other, but it still should, I feel like it should start with the basis of just being a person as opposed to being an announcer. These will change in terms of the circumstances, whether you're saying a title or you're saying credits or you are supposed to, or you're going along with something that's particularly bombastic and you're supposed to follow what the creator intends there. So there are a bunch of exceptions to this, but that I feel is the basis to start with something conversational and go from there.
It sounds like that conversational read is contributing to the immersion of the audience. In other words, the audience can fully
oh, yes, very good point. Yes.
But these things that you're talking about, that's all feeding into that everything is anchored on, like you'd said earlier, the influence of making sure the audience is getting what they want. And I'm curious if we could explore the character of the audio description narrator in the sense of, if it came from originally, your family member or your friend leaning in and sharing, oh, this just happened, that in a sense, this type of read that you're talking about is a kind of character, even if it is talking like a normal person. It's bringing intention, and that intention is not to talk down to the audience. In other words, there's not a condescension to it, that it's fully engaged with the read in a way that rides the emotional nuance of the tone. I love that you brought up the speed, that all of these things that you're bringing up, I'm so excited to hear you talk about the elements here.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
We're geeking out. This is like, what is this? This is not Studio Rat. This is like Microphone Rat or something. I don't know.
It's voiceover rat, I guess.
Voiceover rat.
Man, you're balancing so many different things. But it's also a case-by-case basis. The default setting, I think, for a describer, in my opinion, is a fairly neutral person, who is taking in what's happening. And again, like Mark used to say, the best audience you can have, in that they're engaged with what's going on, as a suggestion that to help the creative person, that the audience is supposed to be engaged with what's going on. So come along with me. Although I'm not actually saying that. It's just like, I'm doing this, and hopefully it's a suggestion to the audience to do the same and be engaged in this piece. But yes, also you're still serving the creator, you're still serving the creators, you're still serving the piece. And so again, you are in between the audience and the piece. There are some instances where the piece demands that you are a little more with them than with the audience. That it's a range. This gray area, conduit area that I'm talking about is a range. And there are instances, for example, a period piece, or something that's for kids, or things that elicit very particular reactions, like comedy and, say, horror, or something very, very dark. So they seem to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. They're still asking for rather strong reactions. And those are even trickier because you don't want to be too far into it, but you also don't want to discount what the piece is trying to do. I guess those are extreme examples of what I'm considering all the time. So the language and the delivery that you use is going to change, hopefully, is going to change with the context of the piece. What they're trying to get you to feel, what they're trying to say, the way they're trying to say it, may not always agree. I, as a person, may not always agree with what they're trying to say. If you have to make a choice between, if a piece is somehow, I don't know if problematic is really a term for this, but if you have to make a choice between the audience and the piece in how you're going to deliver something, what the context of your delivery is, the piece has to take priority and let the audience decide for themselves. You're taking into consideration what the audience technically needs to know, but as far as how they react to something, you have to lean toward the piece. You are part of post-production. You are, in that instance, you're part of what the producers are intending, regardless if that happens to be correct or done well or done badly. I've worked in quite a range of visual media. So that means all different levels of competency in the production of visual media. And so in that case, while you're remembering what the audience technically needs to know, in terms of how they receive it or how they react to it, you've got to go with the creator on that one and let the chips fall where they may. It's very tricky. That's, oh my gosh, so many balances we have. It's an easy mistake to make, to be too much of a tour guide for the audience. The whole telling them what they're supposed to think sort of thing. That's super annoying for most people involved. But I just have to remember, just go with what the producers are doing. You're a part of their crew while you're doing this. While you're not speaking necessarily for them, you have their context in mind more than you have the audience's context in mind, because you are part of their production. That's the best I can describe it, I think.
It's a master class.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I guess I could mention my podcast, even though I haven't done it in a while. It's out there in the world and everyone's desperate for more content to consume. Movies for the Blind is a podcast I did starting in 2007. And basically it was audio description of public domain films listened to as audio only. So I thought of it as movies as audiobooks. And of course, this was long before Netflix and all that fun stuff. And so they're out there. There are 300 episodes. It's serialized. Films, depending on how long they were, would take up maybe 2 episodes, maybe 3 episodes. So they're in line, and it's still out there at moviesfortheblind.com.
And that's the best way to reach you?
Best way to reach me, I guess, would be through that or through my regular work site, which is Valerie-H.com. I also can be contacted through my Twitter for Movies for the Blind, which is movies number 4 the Blind is the Twitter handle for that, if you want to look for that. I've gotten more than a little bit of work through that, actually. So it seems like a common way that people contact me and provide feedback.
Oh, thanks so much for this, Valerie. This has been great.
Oh my gosh, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great talking to you.